Okay, so for this next example, we're just gonna go. We're just gonna do a little bit more in Grasshopper. So I'm gonna set up this example again. Have a box and explode it. Delete the top and join the rest. And I'm gonna input this into Grasshopper. And set one brep. So that is just unrolling in just some very specific way. For now, I'm not going to worry about unjoining the edges and in a very specific way. I can always deal with that later. But I do want to set up an 18 by 32 sheet. And one thing I'm going to do is, instead of using my Rhino commands to scale and move and rotate, I'm going to start doing this within Grasshopper. So the first thing I want to do is scale my object because the unrolled part is coming out too large. So I'm going to just, in Grasshopper, a quick way of looking for commands, instead of having to come up here and looking for, say for example, for transform, go to Euclidean and go to and look for scale or rotate. If you double click on the screen, just type in a command, it'll show you a list of commands. You just need to know the exact one you're looking for. This time we're looking for scale. I'm going to plug in the geometry. Go out this way. And it's scaling it by a factor of 1/2. So I'm just going to put in a slider, just a regular number slider. And one thing you'll notice is, as you're scaling it, it's also moving the object. And the main reason why is it's taking the origin point of 0, 0 and the ending point of wherever the box is. So if I move the original box, this thing updates. It actually moves with it. Right, so not only is the object scaling, but it's also moving. For now, that's not going to concern us too much. I can show you later how to scale an object using a very specific origin point. But just for now, we're just going to use this just to scale the object, which in turn scales the unrolled part. And one command we're going to use is we're going to calculate the area of this our 18 by 32 sheet. So again, I type in area, double click and type in area. And what it's asking me is for some kind of geometry. This is a curve. So I can look for that symbol that it's asking for in the geometry, which is here. Or I could also just input a curve. So I'm going to input a curve, set one curve. And the main reason why I'm going to calculate the area is not so much that I actually want the area. What the nice thing about area does is it gives you a center point, the centroid of that area. So it's giving me the center point of that 18 by 32 sheet. And what I want to do with that is now I want to calculate the center point of these pieces. And what I'm hoping to do is match up the center point of this piece to the center point on my 18 by 32 sheet. So now I'm going to do another area. As soon as I plug this in, though, I will notice something a little strange is happening. So as soon as I plug this in, it's calculating the area. I'm going to put in one of these yellow panels. It's calculating the area, but it's calculating the area for each individual unrolled piece. And what I want is 1 point for this entire unrolled piece instead of calculating them individually. So what I have to do first, before I just plug them into the areas, I have to join all these individual pieces. So brep join. I'll join all these pieces, and then I'll plug that in. And now I just have the one single point for that one piece. And now what I want to do is use the command called orient. So I can orient this object onto the sheet from that point onto that point. So orient the actual the geometry that I want is the joined pieces. So I plug that into the geometry. The origin point, so if I go over here, if it's asking for geometry, it's asking for the initial plane and the final plane. So like the initial plane is where it's starting from and where it's going to. So where it's starting at the calculation of this area, which is the calculation of this unrolled piece. So there's my center point, my centroid. So I plug that into A. And where I wanted to go to is my 18 by 32 sheet, which is over here. So I plug it into there. So now I have that part plugged in. And at least for now, if I want to get this to work, the only thing I really need to adjust is the scale of my object. So essentially just adjusting the scale of my unrolled sheet, or the unrolled part. So now it's fitting on the 18 by 32 sheet. Now to get this a little bit larger, it would be nice if I can just rotate this. So let's just try to rotate it. So I'm going to type in rotate. So what it's asking for is the geometry that I want to get, that wants to be rotated, and that is, so if I highlight this, it's highlighting the actual object that I want to rotate. So I plug that in. The angle that I want to rotate, I'm going to type in a slider of 360. What I notice though is when I type in 360, it's actually going between 0 and 1000. So I'm going to go to values and double click on the maximum and make that 360. Let me try it again. Commit those changes, and now commit changes. There you go. See, between 0 and 360. Alright, so if I plug this in, one thing you're going to notice or a few things you'll notice is, one, it is rotating, but one thing that it's rotating, it's the origin point that it's rotating around is the 0, 0 point. I don't necessarily want it to rotate around the 0, 0 point. What I want it to rotate around is essentially the middle of the sheet. But I've already calculated that point of the middle of the sheet based off of this area component. Alright, so as soon as I highlight it, it highlights there. So I'm going to use that point to plug that in. So it's now rotating around that middle point of the 18 by 32 sheet. One thing I'll notice though is when I'm rotating, it's not rotating the way I think it would be rotating. And the main reason why is by default, your rotate command in Grasshopper is set up to radians. So you can see right here where it says rotation angle in radians. But I want those angles to be converted into degrees. So I'm going to right click and change it to convert it to degrees. So as soon as I do, now it rotates the way I want it to rotate. Alright, so say for example I can double click on the slider, type in 90, hit the green check mark. So now it's rotating 90. The only difference is I'm seeing the rotated object and the orientated object. So I'm going to right click on orient and unpreview it. So the only thing I'm really seeing now is the rotated object. So now I can come back here to my scale, and again I'm scaling this box, which is scaling up the unrolled object, which is placing this unrolled object onto my 18 by 32 sheet. So I can now get a better fit for it on my 18 by 32 sheet. And if I wanted to, I can take one last step. So after I rotate it, I can also just move it, just to get the maximum fit on my 18 by 32 sheet. So I use the move command. Okay, I know what I want to move is that object. Again, what it's showing me is it's showing me two objects on here. It's showing me the rotated object and the moved object. So I want to turn off the rotate object. So unpreview that. And technically it's moving it, but not in the direction I want it to be moved in. Right? So it's moving it 0, 0, 10. So it's moving it 10 units up. I really don't, because I'm going to be laser cutting this, I really don't want to know the z factor. I just want to know the x and the y. But I need to have a vector that I'm moving it in, right? Because it's asking for a translation vector. So let me find vectors. There they are. Vector xyz. So I'm going to plug that in. And essentially what I want is I want to have two sliders. So I'm going to just plug one in, adjust it, and then just copy and paste it. So now I have that vector. And by default, when I set up this vector, it's going between 0 and 1, which is not really moving it a whole lot. But if I right click, go to values, the minimum, I'll say I want to go -10. Maximum, I'll go 10. Commit those changes. So now I have a lot more room to adjust this if I need to. And I'm just going to copy and paste this component. So now, again, I can adjust it however I want. And I can come over here and adjust the scale so I can maximize my 18 by 32 sheet. And once I have this part ready, I can always, if this is what I want, I could always right click, click on bake, I copied those out of the way, delete the original, and then now set this up to be laser cut as usual. So now I'm running all of this through Grasshopper. So now if I wanted to, I could go back to my original object and use either unjoin edge or join edge so that this unrolls differently. And now I can start to design something that is very specific to my my original sheet. So I can also just rotate this back to 0. And if I wanted to, I can scale this however I wanted to. So come back here and scale. Let's get this just a little bit larger and set this up so that it actually fits on the sheet. This one doesn't need to move, so I'll just reset this one back to 0. And I can just get it, set this up wherever I need to. So now I'm using Grasshopper a little bit more, or a lot more, to actually start to design this object in a very specific unrolled way.